Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel. Wherever you are in the world, loads and loads of love to each and every one of you. Do hope you're doing well. Hope you're keeping lovely and warm. Hope life is treating you very kindly. And loads of love, as I say. And don't forget to get that lovely hot cup of cocoa because you're going to need it tonight because I've got a fabulous story for you. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Brian and I'm from Kentucky, which is the southeastern interior portion of North America, which borders Virginia to the Midwest and southeast, Tennessee to the east, Missouri to the west, Illinois to the northwest, and Indiana and Ohio to the north. Our weather here is described as humid subtropical climate, and we are very lucky living in this part of the world, as the Ohio River nourishes and feeds our land bountifully, and has done so for many centuries, and this can be seen in the resplendent richness of the land. The Appalachian Mountains also offers a plethora of benefits for the rich earth, like fresh water sources, indigenous diverse animal species and habitat, as well as renewable energy, and last but not least the benefits of countless hiking trails and exquisite breathtaking views. I mean, what is there not to like? I have lived here in Kentucky all my life, and I raised my family in the city of Somerset, which is in Pulaski County, and I've always liked it here, because it's not too big, nor is it too small. It's an exquisite part of the world to live, because there is beautiful open countryside here, prairies, marinas, parks, silvery lakes, waterfalls, and so much more. My wife Daisy and I have raised our two sons in a rural, rustic lifestyle that was easygoing and carefree, but with structure, routine, boundaries and rules. When they became teenagers, one of my sons, Eddie, was always getting into all kinds of dreadful trouble, while my other son thrived in life, succeeded in school and sports, and became the most reliable, trustworthy boy, aspiring to become a surgeon one day and focusing on all his degrees. Eddie, on the other hand, was as directionless as a bird without wings, hopping from one plant pot to the next and getting caught up in all kinds of precarious situations and nearly being eaten by the cat along the way. All I can say is it's a good job that cats have 9 lives, because Eddie has been through hundreds of scrapes and near misses in his life, much like a cat. Naturally, this has become worrisome for both my wife and I, because we knew it was only a matter of time before trouble came knocking on our door, and it seems we didn't have to wait for very long. How could 2 boys raised by the same diligent, assiduous and punctilious parents like ourselves, who emphatically believed we were doing a great job, turn out so differently? Most people believe that parents are entirely responsible for the way that their children turn out in the long term. And to a degree I believe that they are right, but sometimes no matter what you do and how much prudent discipline you enforce on your children, and no matter how hard you try, sometimes one of your kids can turn into the dreaded bad apple. The best way I can explain it to you is like having an orchard of apples that you fertilise and fastidiously take care of as best as you can, and most of your apple trees produce a fine, illustrious, superior crop. 1 or 2 let you down continuously and keep producing noxious, defiled and rotten fruit, and despite your very best efforts, they keep failing you. Does that make you an ineffectual, impotent farmer? Most certainly not. Sometimes it just is what it is. Some suggest that difficult children are brought upon us to teach us life lessons and to help us face adversity. And if that's the case, let me say this, I've had quite enough. I must confess, when it comes to my kids, irrespective of their bad behaviour, you never stop loving them, and as a father, I would move the world for both of them. I believe all the problems started for Eddie when he was about 15 years old. He began to smoke cannabis, drink copious amounts of alcohol, and experiment liberally with drugs. He would also hang around the most dreadful lowlives that you've ever seen. There were times he ended up in a prison cell overnight for drunk disorderly behaviour. So growing up, our obstinate and willful son did give us a great deal of grief and cause us undue heartbreak and stress. Yet I've seen many more parents dealing with kids far more challenging than Eddie. So one has to be grateful for small mercies, however small they may be. I would say that my hair turned white overnight after Eddie spent his first night in a prison cell. But after he overdosed on drugs and was involved in a car accident, of which one of his friends was charged with driving under the influence of alcohol, I was beginning to anticipate that the drama and upheaval, not to mention calamity, was very much likely to follow Eddie around, like an ominous black shadow wherever he went in life. I knew it was going to drag him down on his journey, and it would seem I was right in the short term. My strange, incredulous story that ultimately led to my Bigfoot encounter happened when I received that emergency call. That call that every parent dreads from the hospital. For a moment I feared the very worst, and thought that this time my son had finally run out of luck, or lost his 9 lives, so to speak. I was almost certain he was dead, and my heart was in my mouth as I hung on to my cell phone for dear life, almost too terrified to listen to the words that I was about to hear. I remember my wife was as white as a sheet, and her eyes as round as an owl's. Imagine my monumental relief when I was informed by the doctor that Eddie was very badly injured and was in hospital awaiting multiple surgeries, as he had been mauled by a bear. "What, a bear?" cried my wife, looking aghast. "How the heck did that happen? Poor Eddie." We immediately raced over to the hospital to see our precious son, and my wife was smothering him with so much affection, rather like a pampered pooch. I think she was so heartily relieved that he was still with us, and still on the earth plane. My son was a horrific sight to behold, and was black and blue from serious bruising, and he looked as if he'd been through a mince grinder, because he looked so beaten up, and the doctor seemed satisfied that he had indeed been mauled by a bear. "Hello, I'm very pleased to meet you. I'm Dr. Baker," said the doctor, shaking my hand very vigorously. "Your son is going to be needing several long surgeries, I'm afraid. He's very lucky to be alive. That bear really did give your son a very big thrashing." "But he's going to be fine, isn't he?" I asked. "He should be all right. He should be very good, given his age, and he's still young. The bones should heal well. I would imagine he'll be as right as rain in no time at all." "Thanks, Doc," I said. I was indeed very grateful that Eddie was alive and with us. But when I began to ask my son what had happened to him, I noticed that he became very guarded, defensive and uptight. I knew immediately he was hiding something, but what I couldn't imagine. I knew instinctively when my son was not telling me the truth. He'd always twitch and rub the area above his chin pensively, and avoid looking directly into my eyes. "I told you, Dad, it was a bear," he snapped in a touchy voice. "Well, how did you end up being charged by a bear?" I asked. "That's what I want to know." "I was at the wrong place at the wrong time, that's all. You know the deal." "No, actually I don't." "Tell me," I said. "Tell me, what is the deal?" "I don't want to talk about it right now," said Eddie, being incredibly evasive and grabbing his water bottle to avoid talking any further. "Something's not right," I told my wife when I returned home that night. "Eddie's as prickly as a hedgehog, and as neurotic and as skittish as a raccoon. He looks like one too, with that black bruising around his eyes." "You're right," said my wife. "He's definitely hiding something. But what? I can't imagine." This was when we unanimously decided to call one of Eddie's friends, a young man called Howie, who he used to hang around with all the time. He was one of Eddie's more likeable friends. Most of them I didn't like at all. I knew I could railroad or persuade the boy, if you like, to let the cat out of the bag after a few beers. Howie was a garrulous young man whose tongue was capable of loosening considerably, and so this is what he told me after we'd offered him several beers. Before long, I'm glad to say that he became obligingly loquacious and voluble whilst remaining remarkably sober, but after a few drinks he seemed to enjoy prattling away. "We decided to go poaching," he said, letting out a loud chuckle. "You decided to do what?" I asked. "To go poaching," he said. "We thought it would be fun." "Son, it's illegal," I said, "and it's wrong. But don't let that stop you," I said, sarcastically, feeling a growing sense of disgust that my beloved Eddie had been out poaching with his friends. What on earth was he thinking? I had not raised him to behave like this. "Sir, if you're going to be all judgmental on us, I won't tell you anything else, because believe me, Eddie will never ever tell you what happened if I don't." "Well, go on," I said. "Tell me everything, and I promise you I won't pass any judgment on you. I need to know what happened." "Well, Rory told us he knew this wonderful place where we could go poaching," he said. There were some big buck there, and some hefty-looking turkeys, so one way or another we would not leave empty-handed, or penniless," he chuckled. We were very excited, because we knew we would make a fast buck or two, and it seemed like easy money. We arrived at this very wooded place with lots of trees, wilderness, and a large lake. We did not want our truck to be seen, so we parked it behind a broken wall, and then we made our way into the woods. But they did not feel right. "What do you mean they didn't feel right?" I asked. "Well, personally, I find woods always tend to be cheerful places with pretty birdsong, but there was something menacing about this place. It was beautiful, don't get me wrong, but it gave me the creeps, and there were funny things in the wood that made it seem even more oppressive and menacing." "What kind of funny things?" I asked. "Well, strange pieces of broken timber made into crosses on the trees, and even on the ground. It was like pieces of wood were blocking our path. It gave you the impression that it was saying, 'Get out.' It just wasn't very welcoming, and it was rather indifferent. If you felt that way, why did you not leave at once? I've always told Eddie to listen to his gut." "Well, I did tell Eddie and Rory that we should leave at once. The place felt rarely off, but they weren't listening. They told me I was being illogical and overreacting, and the strange timber crosses were made by kids fooling around and trying to scare people, and that I was just getting into a tizzy. That's what they told me." "Well, what happened next?" I asked. "Well, we found 2 very sizable dead turkeys that had recently been killed lying there on the ground, and they were so fresh their bodies were still warm to the touch. We thought we'd hit the jackpot because they'd only just been killed, and their necks had been snapped off, which was odd, because how does a hunter get to snap a wild turkey's neck, I ask you? You have to shoot the things. They fly away very fast when they get startled. So the manner in which they were killed was an enigma, but we didn't ponder over that conundrum. Not for long, because we had struck a big deal, and we weren't going to look a gift horse in the mouth." I groaned. "So that's what this is about. You stole the hunter's turkeys, and you ended up in a nasty brawl over a couple of turkeys. Is that what happened?" "Sir, it wasn't quite like that. Well, not as you think anyway. But we did decide to take the hunter's turkeys, as he wasn't around, so why not?" "I knew it," I said. "You were illegally poaching, and now you chose to pilferage a hunter's turkeys. Whatever next? No wonder you got yourself into trouble. The problem with you kids is you just don't ever think before you act." "Do you want me to go on or not?" said Howie, looking heated. "Go on," I said. "Well, all of a sudden we heard this terrible sound, sir. It was like the ground heaved and quaked and rumbled, like it was an earthquake. There's only one way I can describe it to you. We heard these heavy feet thundering towards us. It sounded like an elephant charging in the thicket. You could feel that whatever this thing was, it was huge and dangerous. All of a sudden we smelt its pungent, vile odour, and then we saw it." "Oh, so this is when you encountered the angry bear?" "Sir, this was not a bear. It was Bigfoot." "Say that again," I said, almost choking on my whiskey. "It was Bigfoot, sir." "Are those even real, dear?" asked my wife, looking perturbed. "Is not Bigfoot just a creature of legend?" "This was no legend, ma'am. This was Bigfoot. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true, and I promise you I would rather have faced a bear any day of my life than this capricious, embittered thing, because it was quite literally bristling. It was seething so much, like a rabid dog. It was as mad as hell." I watched in horror as Howie began to tremble violently as he recalled what happened, as if he was reliving the event all over again. "Calm down, son," I said, giving him a shot of brandy to calm down his nerve. "Carry on with your story. You're doing well, son. I know it's not easy, but I need to hear it all in detail to make sense of what happened." "Well, this bearish, cantankerous critter was colossal, sir. It was growling at us. Its lips rolled back and it was showing us its teeth, and its nostrils were flaring. I told Rory to drop the turkeys because I knew they were his, And this was why the Bigfoot was so pugnacious and hot under the collar. We had stolen his kill. Rory just refused to drop the turkeys because he wanted them so much. He told Eddie to shoot the Bigfoot dead. He kept screaming, "Kill him, Eddie, kill him now." Your son began to freak out, sir. He couldn't shoot straight. His hands were wobbling so very much. But he still began to fire at the critter. But it was like the bullet landed in the critter's arm, and it had no effect. It was almost as if the bullet was like a mosquito bite to the creature. He didn't seem at all hurt, but he became very angry indeed. "Oh, no," I groaned. "You shot the Bigfoot, didn't you? Oh, how could you be so silly? How could you be so silly? What happened next?" Well, by then Rory did drop the turkeys. He'd become so terrified, and the vengeful critter went straight for your son and picked him up, hurling him into the bushes. Actually, to be honest, I think he got off lightly. The creature could have been way more aggressive, because this thing was so big, if he hit you, it was bound to cause you major physical problems. Anyway, he let out a thunderous growl. He then retrieved his turkeys and glided away. That was when Rory and I went to your son's rescue. In truth, sir, we thought he was dead. Well, he should have been dead. He was lucky to be alive, because that Bigfoot was so strong. Really strong. I mean, powerful, big, huge. As you can imagine, as a father, it was enigmatical to process emotionally, never mind mentally, the inscrutable things I'd just been told about Howie. Whilst I knew that my son had done everything to exacerbate the Bigfoot and had behaved in a deplorable way that only invited trouble and had clearly provoked and antagonized the critter, I was still a father who was naturally very protective towards my son, despite the very fact that he'd failed to engage his common sense. I was now determined to extract my revenge on my son's behalf and kill the Bigfoot that had nearly cost him his life. And so it was that I insisted that Howie showed me exactly where this incident had transpired, and that he took me to the spot. As you can imagine, at first he was very reluctant to go back to the scene of the crime, but with a few $100s in bribery money, he was very easily persuaded to lead me to the location. It's amazing what money can do with kids. "What are you doing?" said my wife. "Don't do anything stupid. Leave that Bigfoot alone, I beg you. You're no better than any of the poachers if you venture out on private land. What you're doing is imbecilic. You could get killed. Has that even crossed your mind for a moment?" It would seem that every evening when the sun went down, I went in search of that Bigfoot. I never saw sight nor sound of him, or his kind for 2 long weeks for that matter. You would think that with the passing of time that my anger would ultimately subside, but you would be wrong. You would think that I would calm down, but I think as a father your desire is to naturally protect your children no matter what, even when they're in the wrong. I was determined to kill the Bigfoot, come hell or high water, and extract my revenge no matter what. The rage bubbled beneath me like a molten volcano waiting to burst its banks and spew out its lethal lava. I was also champing at the bit to extract my revenge, as no one hurts my son without paying a costly price. Then one evening I hit pay dirt. I knew the critter was around because I smelt that strange pungent odour that Howie had warned me about. And also for the first time in 2 whole weeks, the wood green had become ominously quiet, as all the sounds of the crickets and frogs had subsided. Armed with my high-caliber rifle and wearing my headlamp, I moved ever forward stealthily, darting quietly from one tree to another, making very certain to be as quiet as possible. All of a sudden I heard this strange chattering sound. For a moment I thought that there were people in the woods speaking Chinese or Mandarin, or clearly someone was having a conversation. I moved very cautiously towards the noise, as quietly as I possibly could. I'd like to mention that I was covered in an odour eliminator that I used for hunting that has always worked well for me in the past, in ensuring that animals are oblivious to my presence. Whether this helped or not, I have no idea. It was then that I saw them, and there were 4 of them, mother, father, and 2 sons. It was a family of Bigfoot, and I couldn't believe what I was beholding. The thing that caught me off guard the most, more than anything else, that despite their gargantuan size and the fact that they were covered in hair, they were so alarmingly human-like. I wasn't expecting that at all. I was always under the impression that they were like hairy apes, but in my opinion, this was not the case. Granted, they did look more like primitive man covered in long hair, but in my opinion, the humanness in these creatures was utterly remarkable, completely overtaking any ape-like influences, for they were so much more human. The male was the largest at about 9 foot tall, and the female was 6 foot high, but the two young critters were only about 3 feet, and they were covered with long, flowing, brown hazelnut hair. I watched in awe as this family of Bigfoot interacted together, and it reminded me of my own family. The two little critters climbed up their father's back and began to sift through his hair, almost as if they were looking for fleas or nits, and the father was groaning in absolute pleasure as his two kids played and pulled and tugged at his hair. He clearly enjoyed the attention he was receiving. The female critter was chatting away, reminding me of a garrulous wife. She never stopped gassing. It would seem that the female Bigfoot was equally as bad as my own wife, because she didn't stop once to draw breath, but went on and on chattering. I think the other Bigfoots were listening to her, or if they weren't, they were pretending to, as I do with my wife from time to time, when I say, "Yes, dear," but haven't heard a word she's actually said. I realised that this father was the critter that I wanted to take out, but he didn't look like such a bad fellow after all, from where I was standing. I could discern he really adored his two younglings, and his partner as well, and that was when I realised there was no way that I could possibly shoot this critter. I would be depriving two younglings of a loving father and a female of her beloved partner. It seemed so wrong, and I couldn't do it. The problem was, these critters were way too human for my liking. I retreated out of the woods, returning back to my car, and I realised one thing from my experience is that every single parent out there does the best for their kids. We try our level best to protect them and lead them down the right path, but in the end our kids have to take responsibility for the choices they invariably make. I am no longer angry with that Bigfoot, who was only doing what all fathers try to do, and that is to provide for their families. And how can you blame him for that? He was providing those turkeys for them, which my child was trying to take away from him. He naturally lashed out. That is what I began to see. For some bizarre reason, Eddie seems to have been knocked into shape by that big male Bigfoot, because he's making better choices in his life all of a sudden. Perhaps being close to death, he realised what really mattered. He chose to become a physiotherapist and realised that this is what he was desirous to do after receiving physiotherapy for all his injuries. Isn't it funny how life has a weird way of working out in the end? So there you are. That's my story. What an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.